न्याय का सबके लिए, आकाश न्याय का सबके लिए.
Hello, I am Sayonara Teleslag, Member Secretary, Goa State Legal Services Authority. Welcome to Virtual Juridic Care Series. Well, September 16th is observed as World Ozone Day, and it has been celebrated since 1994 and was established by the United Nations General Assembly. The day is mainly intended to spread awareness of the depletion of the ozone layer and search for solutions to preserve it. The ozone layer protects the earth from the sun's harmful rays. It is essentially a fragile shield of gas, and because of this, it plays a massive role in helping to preserve life on our planet. One of the best ways to celebrate World Ozone Day is by learning more about the ozone layer. So why not honor World Ozone Day by enhancing your knowledge? We have scheduled a discussion on environment impact assessment, and the participants are Advocate Shrimati Norma Alvarez and Architect Shrimati Talula De Silva. Advocate Shrimati Norma Alvarez is a practicing lawyer and generally appears in public interest litigations such as environment-related matters, women's issues, animal welfare, human rights at the Bombay High Court and the Supreme Court of India. Whereas Architect Shrimati Talula De Silva is a practicing architect designing and building eco-friendly and sustainable building projects. She voluntarily promotes nature trails. Talula also implements social and community projects. Welcome to this episode on Virtual Juridic Care Series. Let's start with the discussion.
Thank you for inviting us to this conversation. I am Norma Alvarez, advocate, practicing at the Panaji bench of the Bombay High Court in these very premises. I am happy to be here with my young architect friend, Talula.
Hello, I am Talula De Silva. I am an architect practicing in Panjim, and we are here basically, with one passion that connects us both, and that is environment. And we'll be fielding a lot of questions to each other which need to be shared with all of you. So, Norma, in these pandemic times, I had suddenly a lot of emails coming from my juniors, and it was basically talking about the EIA. And I was surprised because, normally it's you don't expect youngsters to know anything about the EIA. And what happened was there is a draft EIA notification out, and comments were invited, and then the Delhi High Court extended the date to 11th of August. I think earlier the deadline was 30th of June. And I just wanted to ask you this because many of us don't know what is an EIA, what is its connection to environment, and in fact what is its connection to architecture.
Yeah. EIA stands for Environment Impact Assessment, and it's the EIA notification. It was first introduced in 1994, and its purpose is to make an environment assessment of the impact that a particular project will cause on the environment. In other words, basically all projects, infrastructure, development projects, have some impact on the environment because they disturb the natural setting. So the EIA notification is to find out in advance what will be the likely impact in order to propose mitigation measures if something like that is possible, or to say that, sorry, this project will devastate the environment, we cannot have that. So the EIA notification set up committees at the center and in the state. Large projects which impact 2 or 3 states or the whole country are clear Cleared means they get an environment clearance from the central government. Smaller projects, local projects go to a state authority. So there is a state EIA and there's a central government, the Ministry of Environment. To help them, they set up environment assessment committees. They look at the project and they recommend them or they put negative comments. In order for them to consider it, every project which is listed on a schedule, not all projects come under it, but large projects, ports, railways, big infrastructure programs, they are listed in a schedule. If you are on the schedule, then you know I must do an EIA. Now that EIA is done by companies which are recognized by the Ministry of Environment as competent or able to do an EIA. So armed with that EIA document, that document says everything that is supposed to be said. Unfortunately, a lot of time is spent on things like names of birds and rivers and all this. But really the EIA authority should be checking the real impact. That EIA document goes to the SEAC or the Central EAC. They study it, they propose it to the authority, and then you get maybe an environment clearance which will have a list of conditions which you are supposed to follow when you implement the project. That EIA notification also has periodic reports which are to be presented, authorities to check from time to time. So in a sense, the EIA notification is an enabling notification. It is enabling you to do your project without harming the environment substantially. This EIA notification is very different from another notification which you may have heard about, that is the CRZ notification, the Coastal Regulation Zone notification. There are two notifications, both on the environment, but they are different from each other.
Right. So I've heard of the CRZ and I think it's very, very pertinent that coastal areas are covered under the notification. Can you tell us more about what is the difference or what does CRZ notification actually imply?
I think everybody in Goa knows about CRZ notification because Goa being a coastal state with much of its land in the coastal area and fringed by the seas, we are bound to be impacted by the CRZ notification. But there is a big difference between the two. Anyway, first of all, the CRZ notification, unlike the EIA notification, is not an enabling notification. It is a restrictive notification. The CRZ notification came up because it was realized that climate change, sea warming, sea level rising is going to impact who first? The coast. You're going to have the waters coming into the coastal areas. And so it was decided and felt correctly that let us restrict development in the coastal area. Keep the coastal area free from development as much as possible. Tomorrow if the sea rises, all the development will be affected. So the CRZ notification, must remember, is a restrictive notification. It is trying to prevent more and more development from coming in the coastal area. Now it does this by establishing some categories. There is CRZ1, which is a highly restrictive category. It is the most fragile areas. Places like turtle nesting sites, sand dunes, mangroves, mud flats, areas like this, which are very, very ecologically sensitive. They are CRZ1. There, no development. Simply no development. Nothing which is going to interfere, because they are such important ecological assets that we must protect them as far as possible. I think you know, sand dunes, they say, are nature's first line of defense.
Yes.
It's like your soldiers in your front.
Right.
If you interfere with them, everything else comes inside. So these are the kind of areas. Then you have CRZ2, which is the areas already highly developed. Panji city partly, Vasco definitely, Bombay, these are places which are highly developed, they are all CRZ 2. And then you have the in-between areas, more undeveloped than developed. That is all the rural villages, mostly undeveloped. There you have certain amount of development allowed. Now, the CRZ notification comes with a big list of what you cannot do and what you can do. And you have to follow that list of rules very strictly. Because in the CRZ notification, if it doesn't say you can do something, then you don't do it. It's as simple as that. If it says you can build a house, well then you can build a house. If it says the house has to be not more than 9 meters high, then that is the limit. So it gives you a whole list of prescriptions, and the cue is that if you don't find it in the notification permissible, then you can't do it. So that is the big difference between the CRZ notification and the EIA notification. EIA is helping you to do your project without damaging the environment. CRZ says coastal area already highly sensitive, liable to damage, do not do development unnecessarily. That's the broad difference.
And I think also
between
the EIA is constantly keeping checks, right? When you say enabling.
Yes, it gives you, it tells you how you can have your project. It restricts what you cannot do. It says knock this off, you can't do that, but you can do this. Right. It's that kind of thing, and there's periodic monitoring. In the CRZ notification, you follow strictly the notification and comply with it. But tell me now, you as an architect, you are designing buildings and projects all over. How do architects see these kind of laws? Do you find them very restrictive? Do you find them challenging? Do you find them a headache? What's your take on that?
So basically, I think just like how you mentioned about the EIA and the CRZ, you know, architects, we are all registered under something called the Council of Architecture. And we have certain, duties and responsibilities that we have to fulfill. And one of the first things is an architect will practice in a way as not to do anything to harm the environment. That is one of the first sort of responsibilities that we have. Now, having said this, besides this, we of course have bylaws, building bylaws, which are a framework, just like how you have CRZ, where certain things are allowed. But again, they change depending on village panchayat areas. There are minor things that are not really shared comprehensively on, let's say, a bylaw or regulation book that we follow. Now, when you say restrictive, I think, for every profession and every individual, there's also some bit of, social responsibility that as an architect, I'm not just designing my house or the house for my client, I'm also going a little bit more, because that house that I built on a given land also has a surrounding area, and that will impact that surrounding environment. So I think where does this consciousness come? And I think that consciousness comes from the values that we learn and uphold as we are growing up. And in our profession, I was lucky that I had mentors who exposed me to so many things which allowed me to take that ownership of environmental responsibility. And I think there are also a lot of professional architects who do that. And while I say that, and while I say that there are regulations and everything, what happens is when there are development projects, let us say, or let us say when an ODP is notified, there are lots of amendments made to the current regulations, and they come periodically. Many a times we don't even know. And when we make an application, when we design something, even if it has public participation and there is inclusive, planning, when the plans go out, there are certain flaws or things that are pointed out, okay, which probably connect to amendments that are made to the long-standing regulations. So this is something that needs to be widely circulated in the fraternity, even with clients, because many times clients also insist, can I do this? Will the provisions allow me? And we have to insist, that there are provisions that you can do this, but there are also restrictions which you should not cross. Yeah. And having said that, what are the mechanisms in the judiciary, to review development projects?
So you see, there are two types of reviews. One would be if you are personally affected by some development. Let's say a house or a building is coming in front of yours. Of course you are affected because you had a view and you don't have it. Or somebody is encroaching on your property. Or there is land acquisition, your property has been acquired. Every act that affects you, you can go to the judiciary for. You can do two couple of things. You can file a civil suit. You can file against whoever is doing the violation, and you can take him to court. That expression colloquially also you will have heard. I will see you in court, or I will take you to court. Well, these are things which are personal redressal of grievances. You file a suit, you engage a lawyer, you lead evidence, you show your papers, the judge gives you a decision, you're not happy with it, you appeal that decision, and so on it goes till you can finally come to the High Court. You can file a writ petition, and then if you don't like that, you can go to the Supreme Court and you can file a petition there challenging. So every violation of law in society, there is a redressal mechanism in the court. But what happens when you are not personally affected by the violation, but you can see that it is a violation of law? Like in environment matters, you can see there is cutting of the hill. You can see that some building is coming up right on the coastline, which is not prohibited. Now you are not what is called an affected party, or you are not what in law is called an interested party. You are interested generally on everything around you, but you don't have a legal interest in that. Then what happens? You can then go to court in a public interest litigation. A public interest litigation means that you are coming to the court to file on behalf of, let us say, people who cannot come, they are very poor and they cannot afford a lawyer, or you are coming because you see that something is happening which would damage the environment, which is part of right to life of everyone. Then you come to the court in a public interest litigation. And you say to the court that I am bringing this point here because I think that this affects everybody, it's a violation of law, and I want the court to take cognizance of it. And in a public interest litigation, the judiciary uses a different sort of mechanism to examine the case. There are certain judicial principles which have come as a result of Supreme Court discussions and decisions in many matters. And there are four very important principles which I would like to say to you, spell out to you. One is the precautionary principle. You know, the precautionary principle from its name itself means you are taking notice of the case because it is likely to cause damage. So this is a case where it may not, the damage may not already be there, but you can see the markings of so many trees to be felled. It's likely to cause damage. Then the court invokes what is called precautionary principle. Then there is the polluter pays principle. This I think most people know. If you pollute, you pay. So this is where the act has happened, the incident has happened, the industry, let us say, has polluted the river, you can show the pollution, and the court says, very well, appoint some authority, assess the damage, pay. Polluter pays principle. There are two other principles which are not so well known. One is the public trust doctrine. Now the public trust doctrine means that the state is the custodian of all the ecological wealth of the nation, whatever is around.
All the resources.
Yes, all the resources. The resources belong to the people. They are our resources. And the state is holding it in trust. So the state as a trustee must look after them. So the court then examines that the state, you are the trustee. How did you let this happen? How did you pass such directions or orders? Which is the authority who gave permissions? Did you not examine that the hill was going to be cut? So you are a trustee. The government servants are executing your directions. They are holding offices. But you are the trustee for the people. The resources belong to the people. And the last is one of the newer ones which has come up, and that is the intergenerational equity principle. That means what? That means we are using the resources of this country, of this nation, of this place, but we must also think that there is a generation ahead of us. There's a future generation. So whatever we use must be equitable so that there is something left for them. As a family, we don't finish all the money and leave our children with nothing. We leave something. So as a people, as an adult nation, we must think of the future. We must think that we cannot remove all the reserves. Mining is an example. You can't remove everything, keep something for the next generation. Our trees, our forests are another. You don't deforest everything. You save things for the future generation. So these are the 4 principles on which courts usually examine a public interest litigation. Because the Supreme Court itself has said, if there is a conflict between economy and environment, then let the environment prevail. So if it's a question of we lose money or we lose the environment, Supreme Court itself has said, let our environment prevail. These are the mechanisms on which the court looks at public interest litigation.
So I'm very happy that you talked about PILs. And one of my first experiences was when I was working with my mentor as a fresh graduate. And he was so concerned about hill slopes being cut. And once when I was with him, this is an architect from Margam called Ramesh Pandekar. He immediately said, no, there's a mechanism in place by which we can protect that hill that belongs to the entire village. And the mechanism was to basically go to the collector, write a letter with evidences and say that this is there. And with the success of that one application, I ended up doing a lot. And but today, if you see, we've also seen a whole lot of youngsters who've been intimidated by law in a way. And people say that, okay, even to make a police complaint, they get scared because they feel they'll be embroiled into something and then they will have to face, some charge when there is no fault on their part. So there are a lot of people who don't want to, go to the court. But now there is a mechanism in place. There are a lot of lawyers also professionally who are helping people with PILs. So can you sort of explain about how somebody can, use this mechanism? How does one file a PIL?
Okay, so, well, you're going to take me out of business if I tell everybody how to file. But the truth of the matter is that anyone can file a PIL. It is a legal complaint that is being made. It's a public interest litigation. But you need not be intimidated by it. You have to be careful about what you're doing. So there's a very simple format. The High Court, the PILs can be filed only in a High Court. You can't file it anywhere else. You file it in the High Court because the High Court has got certain powers. They are called writs. They can issue a writ, which means a direction which must be complied with. That writs don't lie with the lower courts, with the other courts. So you can file it only in the High Court. Anyone can file it. There is a format, and the format is very simple. You briefly state what your issue is in your preliminary paragraphs. You lay out all the facts, whatever are the facts leading up to your what is called cause of action. You set out according to you what is the law being violated. That would be what is called grounds. What are the reasons why you feel this action is against law? So you set the facts out, you list the law, you say how it is violating, and you ask for the release. What do you want? What are the directions that you want the court to pass? Now in a PIL, you have certain declarations to make, and these are very important. One is you must say that you have researched the problem properly. You cannot, for example, get up in the morning, see one article in the newspaper, and run to the court with it and say, see, this article is saying this, I want this. No. You can use the article to start your work, but you must do your own research. You must find out if that place is there, what is the area, what are the orders that were passed, what are the permissions they have, all these you have to make. you should visit the site, you should take some photographs to show at least that you know where the area is. You should find out what is the law, find out whether there are any new amendments, new notifications, new things that are coming, because you are coming to the court asking the court to interfere, and you cannot tell the court, oh, you find out all these things, I brought you the problem. No, you bring the problem, you bring the law, and you suggest the solutions. The court looks at your PIL, and you have to say also, and when I say, it doesn't mean simply say, you have to be correctly saying that you are not personally involved in the thing, and you have not filed any other criminal or civil matter, you are not involved in a criminal or civil matter on the same issue. That means you can't file a case on that problem in the civil court and come to the High Court with a public interest litigation. You can't do that. You have to say that I don't have anything else, I am not connected with this matter, it's a matter of public interest, I am doing this because I think this is important. The court takes it up, and then the court in a public interest litigation, particularly if it is a lay person, the court looks beyond even what you have asked. You know, you may not have asked everything, but the court will look at the issue if they feel that it is a serious issue, some major problem that is brought. And if they find that you are not very, you're not very able to present it, maybe nervousness, or maybe language, or maybe you can't hear, or maybe you're old and you cannot make out, then the court appoints an amicus curiae. It appoints a lawyer to argue on your behalf. So the amicus usually will be helping you to present the matter to the court. You can use the amicus. When the court hears the matter, if it finds it is of merit, it issues a writ. The most important, frequently used one being the writ of mandamus. Mandamus is a do this or stop doing this. There are other writs, habeas corpus and so on, but mandamus is what we mostly come for, to say that stop this hill cutting, stop this tree felling, stop this project, or direct the pollution control board to make an assessment. This is the kind of things that you ask in a court. But you must be very, very careful that you honestly bring all facts before the court. So this is a PIL that anyone can file, but I'm still curious about whether architects are able to convince their clients about the importance of the environment, because after all you're dealing with people who have to make the most out of their property. They want more or less every square inch, if I understand it right, to use it. So are there many people like you who are interested in environment and law and these kind of things?
I think at the core everybody wants to do a good job, and I think all professionals are to some extent sensitive to the environment, but I think many a times what is missing is very strong convictions to say that this is the right thing to do. So initially, and I talk to my interns and young professionals, just that you have to be so strong with your convictions and values that you have to be able to say, at the cost of losing even that first job, say that this is important, and look at the larger picture. You talked about intergenerational equity. It is basically that. You look at the larger picture and the contributions you make, not just to yourself and your family, but to all other generations. So when clients come to you, there is that restriction that I want to, generally for house, for smaller projects, there is no, restriction in terms of how much people want to build, okay? And in fact now, because of, a lot of clients are well read, so they do come and say that, I've heard about sustainable architecture. And one plus point is, if you're doing work in environment, they come to you saying that, Tirula, it's nice that, you're sensitive to the environment, and I would like to hire an architect who can build me a better house. So, in fact, there are clients today who come and say that, we are sensitive to environmental, issues, and they're conscious about the kind of materials they want to use. So many of them come and say that, can I build a mud house? Is it possible? Can I build a house without cement? And I say, of course, because there's already the pressure on resources, and already there is sand scarcity, so it's just a useful progression to use. And for Goa especially, We have lateritic soil which is ideal to use without any additives of cement and sand. So that is of course getting into the technicality, but there are a lot of people who come forward. I have a lot of my peers, who are again very conscious and trying to, make a difference with going beyond just, doing a job of designing a house. Yeah. Having said that, there are, you find that there are a lot of violations, and it either comes from a person who wants to do something and knows the mechanisms but wants a little more. Yes. And maybe professionals are helpless and they're not able to say no to this, and that it's a violation nonetheless. So, but I know that there are mechanisms in place, there are provisions in the law when these violators can be brought to book. Can you tell us a little more about this?
Yeah, to bring a violator to book, which is what I've been doing for the last 30 years in the High Court, because I generally practice only public interest litigation. That's my interest in law. It's not easy. It's a tough job, and you have to do a lot of homework in order to deal with violations, because there will be certain approvals they will have had already on their side. There will be certain steps already taken. So you have to watch for a number of things. One is, as I said, you have to do the research. You have to research the facts. You got to research the documents before. What was the land like? Suppose the project has started. You have to go to the site. I always make a site visit. I cannot argue a case without knowing what I am arguing. To the left is this, or to the right is that, behind is the hill, whatever. So you do a site visit, you take photographs, you find out the state in which the building has reached, because courts don't like to interfere very much once there is a certain amount of development, and they will ask you why you have come late. It's a word called laches. It means that what were you doing? You were sleeping all this while, now you have come, the building is 10 stories high. Not to say that courts have not interfered in such cases. There is a famous case in Bombay more than 25 years ago, Pratibha, where the building of above 7 floors was brought down and so on. So courts do interfere, but you have to do a lot of homework and you have to do a lot of research. You have to file RTI. That's a wonderful and powerful weapon which all citizens can use if you want to get documents. File an application, which is what you said you did. You made an application, you made a complaint to someone. But if you don't know certain things, you can file an application, only 10 rupees, frame your questions, ask for documents. Ask to inspect the file, ask for copies of documents. With that, you draft your petition, you look at the law and so on and so forth, you file your reliefs, and you prepare your arguments. Because you have to be able to very clearly tell the court what is the issue at hand and what is the big problem. And courts don't have all the time in the world to listen. They say that in the first 5 minutes you must be able to explain to the court what you want. So you must know your facts clearly and properly. You have to make a complaint or a representation to the government. That is mandatory. You have to complain to the authority first. You can't say, this is wrong, I'll go to court. Let the court sort it. Court will ask you, who have you complained to? So you must make a representation. That is, your client must make a representation. When you have that, you go to court. And I'll tell you one thing in court. It's arguments, it's persuasion, it's knowing the documents, it's showing, it's whatever. But I have always been very honest with the court. I think honesty is something that is absolutely mandatory. For example, if the other side brings up something that you have left out, then they could say that you have deliberately left it out. And you got to explain to the court how you did not have the document, or if you left it out, why you left it out. Sometimes I have had cases where the client had entered into some arrangement with that party before over something. They bring that up. Now that's come suddenly in front of you. You have to be very honest. In all my years of practicing, I have always been honest, and I have told the courts that I didn't know this. If you want, I can step down if you want, the client can step down, take up the matter as a suo motu case. Because if these are very important to ensure that it is not your personal little vendetta and your personal battle which you are trying to fight. And if you succeed, or to the extent that you succeed, you must follow up the directions. You know, in my very first case, which was long ago, I remember we wanted the building to be brought down and we did not succeed to the hotel. But the court still passed a small direction which said no development in 200 meters, remove whatever is in 200 meters. It allowed the building to remain, the rest of the building, but it said remove whatever was in 200 meters. Now, technically we didn't win the case, but that direction served as a direction for all time to come. Nobody dared to build in 200 meters because the court had said remove that. Now what is very important, and very often public interest citizens who come sometimes forget about it, is follow up on the directions, pursue the directions. If the court has said something which you didn't ask for, don't say, oh, I didn't ask for that, I don't care. Follow up the directions, follow up the conclusions of the court, because in my mind the motto is this: if I have lost a case, a public interest case, which I believe is really public interest, I don't take it personally. I say, well, society lost. Everybody loses. I am fighting in public interest. The judges lose, the other side loses, the clients lose, everybody loses. This if you're coming in genuine public interest. So it's never my personal loss, and that's why I do find the courage to come again and again to the court. Thankfully, with some successes at least, and keeping this whole public interest alive. And to get back to your very first question about this EIA notification which you mentioned, you know, to the EIA notification, the citizenry awakeness is so much that the ministry got over 1 lakh of comments on the EIA notification. Most of them will be opposing certain clauses and so on, because the entire nation was shooken up with this notification, which seemed to give away so much of the environment and downgrade it so substantially. So citizens have woken up. I think they are alive to the environment. There's so much of degradation and damage around. We are very conscious about sea level rise, climate change. We have got the shock of COVID on us. So now we know that the environment is serious business.
Yes.
And I think that's good for all of us.
Yes, and I think there's a large representation from lawyers.
Yes.
You know? So I think that also is a plus, because I think more and more people are understanding, especially during the COVID, like you said, the connection of environment to all our professions. Business to profession, architecture to environment, business to environment, law to environment, everything to environment. On that note, let us end.
Thank you so much, Kalina.
Thank you.
It was lovely to discuss.
Thanks to you too.
That was a discussion on environment impact assessment by Advocate Srimati Norma Alvarez and Architect Srimati Talula De Silva. World Ozone Day is important because it is a day that is used for spreading awareness regarding the ozone layer's depletion, as well as the search for solutions in order to preserve it. There is a hole in the ozone layer that enables big quantities of ultraviolet light to enter it. The hole in the ozone layer is harmful despite the fact that it is caused because of natural fluctuations. It can also be caused by activities that we all engage in as humans, which emit gases that end up in the stratosphere, degrading the ozone molecules, as well as enhancing the impact and size of the hole in the ozone layer. This is a health issue and environmental problem, as excess solar radiation is a threat to any type of life. I remember a quote of Mahatma Gandhi, and I quote it: "The world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed." Unquote. So, let each of us strive to preserve the environment. Thank you all for joining us in this session. Looking forward to another session next week. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe. Namaskar.
राष्ट्रीय न्यायिक सेवा प्राधिकरण
न्यायालयातल्या कारवाई खातीर बरो वकील मेळून दिता.
वेळार योग्य कायद्या खालची मदत आणि सल्लो दिता
लोक अदालत द्वारा चड काळच्या केसीक बेगीन सोपयता.
आणि ते बी सामके मोफत.
राष्ट्रीय न्यायिक सेवा प्राधिकरण बेस बरो न्याय बेस बरो समाज.
अधिक माहिती खातीर लागच्या न्यायालयातल्या न्यायिक सेवा प्राधिकरण कार्यालया लागीं संपर्क करा
वा टोल फ्री नंबर 151000 चेर फोन करा.